Hello. Welcome back to my channel. She's so cute. Hello. And this week's video is going to be a tiny bit different before I start filming the next week, if that makes sense. Basically, I delivered a talk at work on PMDD, and it is part of the reason I have started this idea of filming for at least the next 4 weeks, so that we together can see how my cycle affects me throughout the month, week to week. Because I have a PMDD diagnosis and struggle differently each month, but do struggle with it still. What I wanted to do with this video is basically intro it to then cut to the presentation I delivered at work, so that you can learn a little bit about what it is and how it affects me. And then the following video will be week 3 of this and of my cycle. So potentially at the beginning of my luteal phase. 2 things I want to say about the presentation clip that you're about to see. First off, there is aircon in the room that we do education in at work. It is the HIT studio, so the aircon is always on. And unfortunately, because I wasn't wearing a mic or anything, you will need to put the volume up so that you can hear me, and slightly ignore the aircon in the background. And I'm sorry about that. So that is point number 1. Point number 2 is there is a slight mistake in there, which I think I mentioned twice, around serotonin reuptake. And I say something about your brain limiting the serotonin reuptake, because in my head that means less serotonin, less happiness. But what actually happens is it increases the serotonin reuptake, and therefore there isn't enough serotonin staying in your brain, which therefore means less happiness. So when I say limiting serotonin uptake, I actually mean increasing serotonin reuptake, because I just can't get my head around that and it confuses me. It will make sense as you watch the video, but I just wanted to correct that point. Anyway, so cut to me at work delivering a PMDD presentation to the rest of the staff team. I am equally as nervous. I don't like big groups, so you guys are terrifying. But equally, this isn't something that I have actually spoken about to many people. It took me about a year to open up to Ethan, so it's a lot to tell all of you guys. But all more reason to do it. Before I start, I just want to know how many people have actually heard of PMDD or know what it is. So, I've just quickly put up what it is for those that don't know. And a lot of the time, people that are struggling with PMDD refer to it as kind of severe PMS. You can kind of take that as you like, because yes, it is severe PMS, but it is a whole different disorder of its own. If I had to point out anything on this slide to you, I would focus on the final symptom in the bullet points of anxiety, depression, in some cases suicidal. And then if we're taking that quote on the side, that very last sentence is how it interferes with work, social life, sensible life, work, personal life. Because I think as women we do experience PMS, and if you don't know what that is, hopefully you do, but it's a few days before you're having a period, you feel mood swings, pain, you know, a bit emotionally all over the place. When we then take that to PMDD, that can be lasting up to 10 days and can be a lot more severe than that. So a lot of the time gets tied in with anxiety and depression, and I'll go into how it is separate from those 2 things, but if you think of your typical symptoms for those 2 mental health issues, this is kind of tied into that. I think, and I was confirming with Maddie, that PMDD is the only
only mental health issue that is a mental health issue. Most others are kind of a physical condition. So just something to bear in mind when you're trying to understand what a client's going through is if you take it from an approach of mental health rather than physical health, it is obviously separate. So my slide is like this, because every time I've delivered this, it has been slightly different just from how I'm feeling on the day and what it is that I actually want to share. But I have been suffering with PMDD for the last 2 years, and the last year of that has been diagnosed. So before that, I just thought I was going crazy. And if I had to sum it up, for 1 week to 10 days of every single month, so every single cycle, I feel like my life is falling apart or is utter shit. And that is just to kind of sum it up nicely. What that means is that day to day, I don't want to live my life. Now, I'm not suicidal, and some people with PMDD are really suicidal, and there are some really scary statistics on that. And luckily, I'm not there. But what I mean by that is, if you think of your kind of typical depressive symptoms, is I don't want to get up out of bed, I don't want to come to work, I don't want to see my friends, I don't want to be with my partner as much as I love him. But I can't control those feelings, and I think one of the most difficult things for me is being able to rationally tell myself that does absolutely nothing. So even if I'm feeling all those feelings and I'm trying to tell myself that this is just because of the hormones and this is just, how it's going to be for now, there's no way of escaping that feeling. And I'm just going to have a drink because that is giving me hunger right now. But I think day to day, in that 10-day PMDD period, I lose all my passion for everything I would usually love. So, as I said, it's really difficult to come to work. It's equally difficult to train, which is obviously my favourite thing to do. And I think I struggle especially with the social side of it. So, if you're kind of relating this to a client, a lot of our clients are really lucky that in that time they can work from home. They can manage their diaries so that they don't have so many meetings. Obviously, in our job, that is impossible. So, seeing 6 to 8 clients a day for a week where just coming to work feels impossible, it feels really, really hard to put on that face for those people. To then carry that to the staff room and to all of you guys, as much as Lenka's told me that I'm quite good at putting on a face, which I appreciate, but I try so hard to do that and it doesn't always work. And then what happens is I notice that I've been slightly rude or not engaged or whatever, and then I beat myself up about how I can't control that, but I'm still doing that, and I don't want to use this as an excuse, but it's so difficult to actually do. There isn't a known causation for PMDD, so I was going to go on to kind of how it looks like in a cycle and talk about the hormones, but it's basically some people's brains react to the change in hormones differently, and that's what limits the serotonin reuptake, which is why it's then linked to depression, because you're experiencing the same thing that people with depression would experience. And I think and I'm going to go through treatments as well, but unless you're trying to treat that medically, there isn't really anything that can be done. And having that out of your control does just put it on a loop of being more difficult. And those that have suffered PMS, or if you're a man, you've just had a bad day at work, you know that feeling of not wanting to go to work, but you know that that day is going to pass and the next day is going to be better. When you're on day 1 out of 10 of that, it's really hard to rationally say, well, we're going to get over this because worse than others, and there isn't a clear reason as to why. If I'm more stressed or more tired in my normal non-PMDD life, it makes PMDD worse. But if I don't have those things, it doesn't make PMDD better. That could still happen. So there isn't no known causation. There are some correlations. I think after speaking to several people with PMDD, we're really good at kind of downplaying it and trying to talk ourselves into, I'm really over-exaggerating this and it's going to be fine, and maybe it's not happening. And I think especially when you're trying to go to a doctor's surgery with that, they then don't really know actually how bad it is affecting your day-to-day life. Which is why I'm really bad at talking about it, because I don't want to just stand here and have a bit of a sob story about how 10 days I struggled, because everybody has their issues that they deal with. So yeah. So to give you a bit of a better idea of what this looks like in a cycle, hopefully you're all very familiar with the menstrual cycle, and unfortunately PMDD covers that entire blue highlighted part on the second half, so it can be up to 2 weeks of your cycle, anywhere between 7 and 14 days usually. And what they think is going on is that you have this sudden drop in estrogen and then this steady rise in progesterone, and your brain is just reacting, I don't want to say over the top, but it does feel a bit over the top, to that change in hormones, which is absolutely normal to be happening. So, as I said, women go through PMS all the time, and when we're looking at diagnosing, you kind of go in to see your GP and you're like, I feel like I'm struggling with something, but everybody goes through PMS, so maybe it is just that. And for about 6 months last year, at the beginning of last year, I was just convinced that maybe I did have a form of depression or anxiety. And the first time I went to the GP and kind of said that, it was a bit of a difficult thing to talk about, and nothing really came from that appointment. And then I started talking to my therapist about it, and I was like, well, I don't know if I'm just being really over the top, or I don't feel like it all the time, so I don't really know what's going on. And my therapist recommended journaling what days I feel like what, and trying to just make sure I was also tracking my cycle, which I do anyway. And once we put the two together, it had a very noticeable cycle, which is what they look for. I think this is actually now 3 months worth of a diary, where they just want to see that kind of consistent cycle of how you're feeling. My GP in particular wanted to see that journal, and also they're really interested in how it affects your day-to-day life, because if it's not that big of a deal, then they're less fussed. But if you're saying, I split up with my partner because of it, or I don't want to go to work, or I've written out my resignation, and should I, loads of people go with various different things, and especially those that are suicidal, obviously that's an extreme case of it. So that's kind of what they're looking for when they're diagnosing. Once you've been diagnosed, the treatment is free, hilarious. And they first asked me, well, how healthy is your lifestyle? And I burst into tears, because if you know me, I drink 1 million litres of water a day, I sleep 8 to 10 hours a night, I exercise, I eat well, I don't drink alcohol, I don't smoke, I don't drink caffeine, I don't do any of that. And for that to be the treatment felt really frustrating, because I was like, I'm doing all the right things and I'm still feeling like shit, and this is completely out of my control. And again, I think you kind of gaslight yourself into, well, maybe I'm just overreacting then. But the two that they kind of push you in are obviously medical, so you can take antidepressants for 10 days of the month, because it's such a short amount of time of taking it, you don't have to be weaned off of them. So some people go down that route, some people use receptive, because then that sort of, kind of gets rid of your cycle and you don't get that effect. Otherwise, it's pretty limited. And I know I've not got long, so I'm just going to run through kind of what I find useful. And one of the things that kind of made me nervous about standing here is I don't have the answers, and I haven't found a way to magically make it work every month. There are some months in particular that are so much harder still, even after a year of trying a million different things. And this is what I would recommend for clients, is yes, you want to gear them into a healthy lifestyle. Obviously, if they're not doing all those things, and that is part of our job anyway, you can help by just getting them, tracking their cycle, knowing where they're at with their sleep, their nutrition, their exercise, and just building that foundation. Because taking out if you have a good routine, you're more likely to be able to find the things that make it worse. I haven't found the things that make it better, but that's at least a start. I think for me, I really struggled, as I've hopefully gotten across, to communicate about it. So when I was first struggling with it, I couldn't talk to Ethan about it, and we were having our own relationship issues anyway last year, as happens in couples. And the fact that I also couldn't talk to him through no fault of his own, but just I didn't have the words to say how much he was struggling, really amplified everything else that was going on with us. On top of the feeling for 10 days like I didn't want my friends, my family, my relationship anyway, that resulted in us splitting up briefly, which some of you will know. And it took being able to sit down and be like, okay, we do need to deal with everything else that's going on, but this is what I'm really struggling with at the minute. Just because how else is he supposed to know, really helped. And I think now that we're a year later, about a week before I know that point in my cycle is coming, I will say to him, we're coming close, and just having him anticipate what that's going to look like for me. Obviously, he knows a lot better now because it's been 2 years, but just having that awareness so that he can support me and kind of accept that things are going to be a little bit different in that time does definitely help. When I have a client with really severe PMDD, and I told her I was doing this, and I said, what do you think I would do to help? What would your advice be if a PT was trying to help a client? And she laughed, because if we knew what could help, we would do it ourselves. And there isn't one thing in particular that I would be like, if you just did this, that's going to help. And her partner gets just as frustrated as I'm sure Ethan does with me, where we don't know, and that's part of the issue anyway. We get frustrated enough with ourselves for not being able to control the way that we're feeling, that nothing that anybody can do will help. But just being aware, listening, validating how crazy that person's thoughts come out at that time is